Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming back for lunch on time just for me. I really appreciate it. Today, obviously, the talk, Hidden in Plain Sight, Abusing Entra's Administrative Units. A little about me. I'm a cloud security researcher at Datadog. I focus on Azure cloud security, and I really love it. Yeah, applause for Azure, or... Today, we're going to be talking about administrative units, which are inside of Entra ID, formerly Azure Active Directory. If you're not familiar with Azure, I really encourage you to try to follow along. We're going to start at the ground basics of what you need to know to understand what's going on. We'll be talking about how administrative units can be used for good, why you might want to use them in your environment, and then a couple attributes of them that are a little bit funny and in the wrong hands could be used for privileged persistence scenarios. We'll walk through how to pull those off in Stratus Red Team. So if you want to go back and you have a test environment you want to play with, you can run these when you get home, figure out what kind of detections would look like for this. And we'll finish talking about that detection and remediation of any potential abuse of administrative units. Just as a disclaimer, this is a talk about using AU features as designed. It doesn't contain any vulnerability. It's just that as we get more features to handle our environments, our identity tools, things like that, attackers get access to those too. And in this kind of situation where somebody already has access to your environment, there's going to be a lot of fancy knobs and bells and switches that they can use in order to stay in an environment, which is getting more common. Seeing recent attacks where attackers, maybe they have access, and they just want to make sure they can keep it. Maybe you thought you kicked them out, they're still in, especially with cloud environments. So that's why we'll be talking about this today. We'll start from the ground up. You may have heard a little bit about roles in Azure in general. There's the general Azure RBAC roles, which would be the permissions over Azure resources. So things like the ability to manage compute, storage, virtual machines, contributor, owner, these kinds of things. If you have that assignment of a scope over a subscription or a resource group, and the ability to manage Azure resources. But there's another side to these roles. It's actually just permissions management in an entirely different application, which is in Entra ID, which again, Azure Active Directory, if anyone's still adjusting their ear. And those are going to be permissions that include things like global administrator. If you'd ever heard things like domain administrator with Active Directory, this is kind of that equivalent. They get the ability to manage users, reset passwords, change your MFA tokens, all that good stuff that can be really juicy to an attacker as well. And if you have control over the Entra ID environment, then you can escalate privileges to handle the Azure resources as well. So both of them are very interesting, but they're different. The reason we're starting out by talking about both of them at once is that for an RBAC role assignment, so that Azure RBAC, the contributor stuff we just talked about, they'll classically always be a scope of assignment that you can set. So as an example, a user might be assigned a role like owner over a bunch of resources in Azure, but they always have to have a subscription or a resource group or a management group as the scope. You have to explicitly set what scope does this permission have. Together, those three things create an Azure RBAC role assignment. In Entra, it hasn't always been that clear. There's a scope, but it's usually just the tenant, everybody in the Entra ID environment. Maybe I'm assigning you in the back the ability to reset passwords, but now you can reset passwords for anybody in the whole Azure, the Entra tenant, even I'm getting used to it. And that's not great, right? I don't know if I trust you at that level. Maybe I trust you with a couple of users, but not everyone. Administrative units give us the ability to scope that role assignment back down. So by creating an administrative unit, we can place users or group objects or devices, and then do a scoped role assignment of an Entra ID role to a user over that administrative unit, meaning that they won't be able to reset everybody's passwords. Now it's just your team. Looking at this visually, the classical role assignment that we see right now would be user administrator over the entire tenant. But we can see we've got a couple users in pink, and they happen to be in Canada. We've had our team grow a lot in Canada. We need our own IT guy, and he needs to manage our accounts. So we hire our Canadian user administrator, but we don't want him to be able to reset executive accounts in France and Switzerland and the US. So in this case, we can create an administrative unit, place our Canadian users in that administrative unit, and then create a scoped role assignment for that role, the user admin role, to that IT admin in Canada over those 2 users, and they can only manage the accounts that they're allowed to. Now, this doesn't change the assignment of our original user administrator. That's still scoped at the tenant level. That still includes our Canadian users. So they can continue doing their job. Our new guy can continue doing his job. Everything's good. Something else that can really help with this is when you go to create administrative units, you have the ability to set what's called a dynamic membership rule. So in this theoretical scenario, we could say any user where their country is set to Canada, put them in that administrative unit. And then we can create the scoped role assignment at the same time. Up here, we can see someone very important, myself, will be able to reset passwords for those users. And it's a great day. Also, just to show, you can do this in the Azure portal. It's quite easy to set up. Reading the documentation a little bit further into administrative units from a security research perspective, there were 2 features that really caught our attention. One was restricted management, which has been in preview for a little while. So preview features, usually they're still under development. They're growing a little bit. They'll be fully developed soon, but there might be something interesting there. The other aspect that we saw was a parameter called hidden membership. And this wasn't documented anywhere outside of this example for creating administrative units. It mentions something about the fact that the Seattle District Technical Schools might want a hidden membership AU. I don't know why. It didn't say anywhere in plain English. So we get to explore this a little bit more on the research side. I'm the lucky person who gets to do the digging and share it with you. For restricted management administrative units, they are going to change the logic of how administrative units are processed. You know how I mentioned when we create our Canadian users administrative unit, we put our users in it, and then the tenant level admin, he can still manage or she can still manage those accounts. With a restricted management AU, that would no longer be the case. So the user administrator with permissions scoped at the tenant level cannot manage those users. Anybody placed in a restricted management AU would require an administrator with a specifically scoped role assignment over that AU in order to manage those users. Why on earth would we want this? Documentation mentions, and I honestly think it's a pretty good use case, that protecting VIP accounts can be really a good idea with these administrative units. So let's say we've got somebody else. We trust them to manage pretty much everyone in the company, but there's still the fact that anyone can reset the CEO's password when they have the ability to reset user passwords, and that's not great. In this case, we can take our VIP users, place them in a restricted management administrative unit, and then grant a scoped role assignment to just the 3 admins we trust the most to be able to reset those passwords. Now, those 3 people will have to wake up in the middle of the night anytime that account management's needed, but we can at least kind of know, okay, the account's a little bit more protected than the average user. Once an account has been placed in a restricted membership, a restricted management AU, you can see that this warning shows up that says, hey, you can't manage this account like other ones. And this view that we've taken screenshots as a global administrator. As a global administrator, you'd expect to do anything, manage any user, do whatever you want, be mad with power. But in this case, we can't edit that user's profile details. We can't delete them. We can't reset their password. We can't revoke their sessions. We can't do anything. We just get this warning that says, hey, they're in this restricted management AU, and you need a scoped role assignment in order to manage that user. So we'd either have to give ourselves a scoped role assignment in order to handle this or delete the administrative unit. But still pretty cool, right? We've protected the user. I think I might have blown past a slide. Yes. So just a note, creating these in the Azure portal is pretty easy. You just need a little switch. This creates the following post request. So this is just a screenshot of Burp Suite. You can see the parameter that we set is member management restricted true, and then we get that back just showing that we successfully created it. Whoop. So now let's talk a little bit about hidden membership administrative units. The hidden membership ones, I mentioned there's not a lot of documentation available on these, so we had to do a little bit more digging. The basics are that unless you have one of 9 specific privileged roles, or you're a member of that administrative unit, your user account is in there, you won't be able to see the membership of it. So something that's really interesting about this is while these roles above can view the membership of an administrative unit, the ones at the bottom cannot. So things like security administrator, security operator don't necessarily have the associated permissions to see the members of an administrative unit. So if you're investigating it and it's this type, you might get a little confused. The role assignments, so over that administrative user, are viewable. So we can see the Canada IT administrator has a scoped role assignment over the Canada users AU. But when we click it, if we don't have the right role, the AU looks empty. There's no warning to show us anything about this in the Azure portal. If we start digging around in the API at the details, we can kind of see it, but not just if we pull the membership. And in order to create one of these, reason why I'm showing you one of these is you can't do it in the Azure portal. So you would need to send that post request with visibility to set to hidden membership directly. And we'll just see that we're getting that back in the response from the server saying, yep, I created your AU. It has hidden membership. Once it's been created, that behavior that I mentioned before, we can see that our extra special users are visible to a global administrator in that administrative unit. But if we have the security admin role, there's nobody there. It looks like it hasn't been set up yet. It's like half configured, right? Weird. But how do we get that list of 9 roles? You know, I mentioned that there's no documentation on this, and then I mentioned 9 specific roles can do a thing. What's going on there? You might expect that when working with Microsoft, it's pretty easy to understand. You know, there's 488 graph permissions as of, a little while ago. There's 109 assignable Entra ID role templates. Surely these things are going to line up to actual actions, right? Like I can look up a list that says, here's the role, here's the API actions it can take. And I went into with the bright, wonderful attitude thinking, this must be possible. It is not. This was the best description that I could find. Somebody saying, oh, yeah, I work at Microsoft. I know that guy on Reddit mentioned, hey, we don't have a direct list of these. Your best bet is probably to look at the permission descriptions in English and line those up to the API calls that you want to make and see if the permissions line up like that. That's OK, I guess. There's a couple of articles that I've linked here below that go into more detail on how permissions in Microsoft Graph and roles in Entra ID might not do what you expect them to. They're really good reads just on generally the background behind some of this and just what happens when you can't actually know the answer. So we've got what? 488 permissions, 109 role templates. That doesn't sound like manual testing. 597 service principles later, allow me to explain. I pulled out Terraform. Terraform's really good for creating users like the ones we need to test these, making the role assignments that were required, setting one permission or one role to each user, and then a little bit of finagling, getting a token for that role and using it to test the API call. Who can view hidden AU members? These were the results. Only 9, the ones that I showed you before. Those 9 Entra ID built-in roles can view the hidden AU members. They get a 200 OK response when they make that API call, and it has our extra special members in it, myself included. The other ones that you're seeing here, the 200 empty, they got the response that said, yeah, you can see the members. There are none. So that was quite a lot of the roles that we were assigning. The others, a few of them got 403 forbidden. That's not atypical. Not every role has the ability to do everything. What I also found really interesting here is that for Microsoft Graph permissions, for those who aren't familiar, Microsoft Graph permissions exist to allow a lot of application permissions against Azure, against the Microsoft Graph. So in this case, only 4 permissions, administrative unit read and read-write all, and directory read and read-write all, could view the administrative unit members. They could get that callback that said 200 OK, but it just said, yeah, it's empty. So that was a little surprising, just something to keep in mind. The application permissions weren't able to see hidden membership AU members. Trying to trace this back to why did this actually happen? What permissions for our roles led to this? We got a pretty clear answer for our high privileged roles. There were 6 others where we could look at what permissions were in those role assignments. But because you can't assign every permission to a custom Entra ID role template, we couldn't test out actually what permission was causing this for each of these. This is super technical stuff. If anyone wants to talk about it more, let me know. Happy to chat about it. If you want to try it out, good luck, and I want to know how it goes. But for now, we've figured it out, right? Surely this is enough. We have an answer. We know who can see the hidden AU membership. Let's recap. So the administrative units allow scoped role assignment of Entra ID roles over a subset of users. Our restricted management administrative units change that logic so that instead of if someone has the tenant role or the scoped role assignment, instead it just says, no, you need that scoped role assignment in order to manage those users. And the hidden membership AU, unless you're in a member of that administrative unit or you have one of those 9 roles, you're not going to be able to see the membership at all. And you won't necessarily get a warning about it either. Let's talk about doing evil. That's really what you're here for, right? No? Oh, that's good. I'm really happy. We're going to talk about 2 scenarios. One involves using restricted management AUs. One involves the hidden membership. The other is just talking about the chaos of a combined scenario. Just to mention again, these scenarios require an attacker to already have global administrator or privileged role administrator in your environment. So they would have need to have already done a lot of damage. They'd have to already have full control of your environment. But it can provide a great way for them to protect and hide accounts that they might want to come back to in the future if you get them. We'll be looking at how to execute these techniques in Stratus Red Team. It's a tool that Datadog provides. It's free. It's open source, not a product, that has various techniques that you can execute against your test cloud environments to easily create and destroy everything that you would need to test out various techniques. We added Entra ID support as a part of this research, so we have a few other techniques not related to administrative units, related to, I think, like OAuth apps. And if you're ever interested in contributing, I just put up a post this week on my experience writing new techniques for it. So if you're new to contributing to open source, I highly recommend working with that project. It's a really fun place to start. In our first scenario, an attacker might be looking to protect an account under their control. Maybe they think they're going to get nabbed. I need to figure out how I'm going to get back into this environment. So they'd create a restricted administrative unit. They'd add the user under their control into that restricted administrative unit. That's their setup. And remember, if you don't have a scoped role assignment over that restricted administrative unit, you don't have the ability to do anything to that user. So let's say the attacker gets caught. They come back in through this account under their control. They can log in as their user, do their nefarious deeds, but any administrator coming to try and clean up this account, even a global admin, wouldn't be able to disable the user under their control. They'd get that warning that says, hey, this user is in a restricted management administrative unit. In order to do anything, you need to have a scoped role assignment. They'd have to figure out what does that mean. Assign themselves a scoped role assignment or delete the administrative unit first before they could even think about containing this user. In an incident, that's a lot of time to spend with a global administrator. I don't know about you. Your time with global admins, they're usually pretty busy. Let's look at this in Stratus. So on the left, we're looking at the Stratus console. On the right, we're looking at the Azure portal. Stratus will use Terraform to create our user, and then the technique will detonate, which is to protect that user by placing them in a restricted administrative unit. We can see that the user was created, the administrative unit, when we click into it, we can see the user was added as a member. If we go back and refresh this user, you can see that now that warning's showing up. Now we're not able to modify them. Now we can't reset their password, and this is as a global admin account. We can't revoke their sessions, so nothing we'd expect to do is possible anymore until we undo that configuration. All right, let's keep going on this. We've got our hidden membership scenario now. So in this case, once they've protected their account, they might think, OK, well, I want to set up some sneaky situations that might be difficult to investigate on permissions assignment. The attacker would create a hidden membership administrative unit. They could add a couple of target users, so maybe some juicy administrators. I don't know if I care about our local Canada administrator, but maybe the tenant level admin. I want to put that account in there, into that hidden administrative unit. And then grant the account that they have control over, the one they've protected, the privileged authentication admin role over that hidden membership administrative unit. So remember, our admin we're targeting is in there, but not everybody can see that. So we'll come back in to the user under their control. The account under their control would then, with privileged authentication admin, have the ability to reset that admin's password and also reset their MFA methods. So this is something really important to note. You might think that account has MFA. A password reset won't do anything. The password reset will update the account's password, but if you clear the account's MFA methods as well, the next time that account logs in with the attacker-generated password, it'll just say, hey, you don't have any MFA methods set up. Would you like to do that? And then, of course, an attacker's going to say, yeah, I would love to do that, register straight away, and now they've got both methods to log in. They can perform their actions on objective, but any security analyst coming to investigate this incident will probably get a little confused, right? They might see the logs that somebody was added to this administrative unit, but then they click it and it's empty, but there's no warnings. Are they done with it? Did they like clean it up? What's going on here? Looking at this in Stratus, in this case, a couple of different users will be created. We've got our user under our control, so our backdoor account, but then we've also got our target user. And you can notice Stratus is doing a lot of things here to support that scenario. And if we look at our target user, we can see that they have global administrator scoped to the directory. So that's the tenant level. That means they're an admin of everything. We'd love to target that account. If we look at our backdoor user, we can see our attack technique has granted the scoped role of a privileged authentication administrator over the scope of that hidden administrative unit. Just showing you to hit home the understanding of scopes here. And we can see that as a global admin, the membership is clear to us. But as a different account, it looks empty. Our security administrator role is not able to see the membership of this administrative unit. Just to show I'm not tricking you, just refreshing a few times. So again, global admin can see the membership. Security administrator cannot. Combining these techniques might lead to some pretty interesting impact. We could create a restricted, and why not, a hidden membership administrative unit as well as attackers. Place that backdoor account in there. It's not clear why this account is restricted at this point. If I'm an analyst coming in to investigate this, and I don't have one of those 9 privileged roles, I'm going to click this user. They'll have the banner that says, hey, this user is in a restricted management administrative unit. You can't do anything to them. And I might say, what? And then click administrative units under their account, and it'll be empty. It's like, what's happening here? In addition, we'll create a hidden membership administrative unit, add the administrators we want to target so that we can come back and reset their accounts later and get into there, and assign that privileged authentication administrator role to the account that we have control over that administrative unit, creating the hidden administrative permissions that we just talked about. So the combination of these, for somebody who's not familiar with administrative units, might be pretty strange to investigate and require a lot of escalation to clean up. What can we do about this? There's a couple of points I want to make here. The administrative unit logs on the left side are really good for any creations or modifications of administrative units. If you want to use administrative units, you may want to keep an eye on things like updating them. The other thing I want to mention is if you have existing detections for role assignments, you need to make sure that they include the scoped member word, basically. So if you're currently flagging on event names that say add member to role, that detection won't catch add scoped member to role. So it's really important to pay attention to word changes like this, where your current detections might be missing something. In order to remediate this kind of scenario, once you have the right people, right, global admin, privileged role admin, it's pretty easy to clean up, delete the administrative unit. There'll be a little bit of a wait, but then the users will go back to normal, and you can go on with containing evil and getting on with your day. As a final recap, administrative units allow scoped role assignment of Entra ID roles over a subset of Entra objects. Restricted management AUs allow only the admins with scoped assignment to manage those objects. But they can protect our sensitive accounts, but they can protect attackers' sensitive accounts too. And hidden membership administrative units will allow only AU members and certain admins to view that membership, which can lead to some strange, concealed permissions assignments. So you should monitor your AU activities if you're not already. Prepare playbooks so that you don't walk into your global admin's office virtually or literally for the first time on a Friday saying, hey, about this thing you don't understand. Yeah, that's not a fun one. And just be prepared to handle the cleanup of these scenarios. You may also want to use them for your own scoped permissions assignment, right? There's a lot of really good uses for administrative units out there. We have a post on this that was published about a month ago on the Datadog Security Labs blog. You can try the techniques in Stratus Red Team. The contribution guide's on my site, so that's not on this slide, but I can share it with you if you're curious. And the other links that I mentioned are there. I believe I'm out of time, but thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Katie. And Give Katie an extra special round of applause because I think I had this music going on in the background, or I heard something.
I noticed it partway through.
Yeah.
I felt
so,
energized but relaxed.
anyways, I think we have time for a couple of questions, but before we get started in on the questions, is Ez Tahoon here? No? Okay.
Is the next speaker in the room?
Is the next
your time
speaker?
to set up?
This is what we're trying to figure out. I'm not seeing any takers, so we do have a pinch hitter who's going to come down while you ask Katie questions about her talk. So, any questions?
I'm seeing a question over here.
Okay.
Let's say you have an attacker who's like maintaining persistence, so they've created a backdoor account, they use the techniques that you talked about. You could still, is it true that you could still see that attacker's account by querying for users? Like this hides role members. Is that correct, or would that?
Yeah, so you're right that the user's not hidden at all. The user account is still there. The part that's going to be obfuscated in the administrative unit, you can still see that object. You can still see the scoped role assignments. For the hidden membership administrative unit, the issue is that you can't see that they're in there, so it's not clear what the scoped role assignment impacts. For restricted management, if it's also concealed, it's not clear why that account has restricted management if you can't see that they're in the AU. Okay. Yeah, so just very specific sneakiness. Thank you. Yes.
Have you seen it exploited in the wild?
Yeah, so the question is if I've seen it exploited in the wild. To my knowledge, I've not seen any exploitation of it in the wild, which is good, but also good for updating detections. Yeah, so the question is, do you need a high level of privilege? You absolutely do. You need to have global admin as an attacker already to execute these scenarios. There's a lot of attacks against identity platforms becoming popular as ways to persist once you have that access, though. So things that you might have heard of. This is not quite as flashy as something like Golden SAML, but just backdooring authentication, taking authentication keys, figuring out how you can persist in that environment is becoming more of a topic. One last question, I think. Yes?
Does a restricted AU always need an admin? Because can you like remove the admin and then no one can control that AU?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So question asker mentioned, does a restricted management AU always need an admin? I think they would have a creator. I hadn't actually looked into that too specifically. I think it is a good thing to look into more. But to my knowledge, especially if I was like the attacker and I created the AU, and then maybe that's the only person who can modify it. To my knowledge, it's a blend of, I should look into that more, and I don't know that it would impact the scenarios we just talked about too much. But really great question. Thank you.